I want you to finish this video filled with ideas, inspiration, and to feel like actually, yes, even though I have a smaller space, I too can start my self-sufficiency journey. Tomorrow is the day that the self-sufficiency garden finally comes out here in the UK. I am super excited. It's easily been perhaps the most exciting growing project that I've done. And so the purpose of this video is to show you just how attainable self-sufficiency is if we kind of flip the script a bit and we approach it from a different direction. And in this video, I'm also sharing the third core skill of becoming self-sufficient. The first is soil health. I've done a practical no-nonsense guide on that. The second is succession planting. I've done a practical guide on that. The third one is included within this video. Sam's going to come on board, and I honestly think it's the most underrated skill for self-sufficiency, and so I'm really excited to share that. Now, the idea of self-sufficiency is almost like a way of life, and you want to make sure that you're keeping track of progress, and this is where the two approaches to self-sufficiency come in. So the first type of self-sufficiency is incremental self-sufficiency. So if you start with an ambitious target, you're going to be working so hard and you've only got that target in your mind that you're not actually celebrating all of those steps that you're getting leading up to that. And so I've done this simple flow chart or flow diagram in the book where it's like all of these stages, these are to do with self-sufficiency. So the first one is when you first eat something that you've grown, and then it's the first time that you've cooked with it and it's been a part of a meal. And then it goes onto a whole meal where you've only used veg from your garden. And then you have your first day where you've only eaten homegrown veg. And then it continues to grow as like your first week, first couple of weeks, and then your first month. And the idea is that you build momentum and that you enjoy all of those little stages. So my colleague Neil is training for the London Marathon. And when you're training for a marathon, you don't just turn up on the day and run 26 miles if you're, trying to get a decent time. You're going to be training for months ahead, where you start off with doing a mile or 2 miles and then it continues to go. Then you do the marathon and you might think, okay, I've done the whole marathon, but maybe half marathons is what I want to continue doing in the future. Self-sufficiency is the exact same thing. An example of how this can be applied to self-sufficiency is just saying between the months of July and January, that half of the year, to have a challenge of only eating homegrown veg within your meals, rather than thinking like you have to do it for the whole year. That's a really nice way of approaching it. Modern day self-sufficiency is about choice. It's about choosing what we wish to be self-sufficient in and for how long. And in terms of what, this brings me into the second approach of self-sufficiency, which is crop-based or crop-focused self-sufficiency. This is partly inspired by Mark from Self-Sufficiency Me, who has this tagline of just be self-sufficient in something. And I thought, that is such a lovely, positive message. And so how do you get started? Well, if you can grow a rosemary plant, even if you just have a patio, you can be self-sufficient in rosemary for the rest of your life, because rosemary is really easy to propagate from cuttings. And so you can continue propagating from that plant for years to come. That then, suddenly, when you think about it that way, you're like, okay, I can see how this can start to build momentum. What other crops can I add into that? Because perennial herbs and annual herbs as well, both of those in particular, are one of the easiest starting points. They don't take up much space, they're very suitable for small spaces, they're also really easy to grow and really easy to propagate. And so suddenly you're in this position where you will, with a little bit of preserving, like maybe freezing some parsley or whatever in butter, but just keeping it as simple as possible, you can suddenly become very quickly completely self-sufficient in herbs. And when you suddenly experience that for the first time, when I did at least, it kind of unlocked something in my mind thinking, okay, how far can I take this? Here's some other examples of things you can do. Rhubarb. Rhubarb is so easy to grow. It's so easy to divide. If you have one plant, in a few years, you could easily end up with 20 or 30, and no one needs that much rhubarb. But I'm just making a point. If you have one rhubarb plant, you'll never have to buy rhubarb again. Another one is salads. And so instead of thinking about crop focused, you could look at organizing things together. So you might want to look at how you could be self-sufficient in potatoes. That would work if you have a bigger space. But if you have a smaller space, looking at how to become self-sufficient in leafy greens and salads is very, very doable. A single raised bed like the one in front of me would easily keep a family of 4, especially if you have a hoop tunnel, self-sufficient in salads year round. And one of the things about self-sufficiency is having fun, and you can start to blend the two approaches together. And so you can think, okay, I want to be self-sufficient in salad for 8 months of the year. And so you can start to see how you don't have to think like everything and it's an all or nothing. Self-sufficiency needs to be seen as a journey. It is just about a journey, and it's about choosing which paths you want to take and what you want to do. Another great crop-focused approach is the allium family. So of course, you could look at just becoming self-sufficient in garlic. If you need, say, 100 garlic bulbs on average a year, grow an extra 10-20% just to account for potential loss. Garlic is really easy to preserve as well, and there you have it, self-sufficient in garlic. But the allium family lends itself perfectly because of its hardiness and because of how easy it is to store, like onions. But you could also include things like chives, those are in the allium family, but also things like leeks. And we're starting to get a little bit closer to that third skill, because there are many cases in a kitchen where you can use leeks in place for onions. And also with onions, they give you an additional harvest, which is the onion leaves, which you can also preserve and use in place of onions in cooking. And so now is a really nice time to bring Sam in. He's written this beautiful chapter within the book about the kitchen side, and we're going to be talking about the third core skill of self-sufficiency, which I think is just as important as soil health and just as important as succession planting. If you haven't seen the succession planting video, in that video I share how it essentially doubles the harvest of your garden. Instead of this space, half size of a tennis court, feeding 2 adults year round, it can feed 4 all of their vegetable needs. This third skill, I would say, is just as important as succession planting. So yeah, Sam, do you want to share what that skill is and a little bit of context behind your approach?
Yeah, so I'm much more used to trying to persuade foodies that homegrown food is the best you're ever going to taste.
It is.
But you guys already know that.
We do.
But yeah, I would say that the most underrated skill that I've come across in gardening is actually understanding how to handle those ingredients and be adaptable in the kitchen. Because so often that we put demands on the kind of crops that we favour based on our favourite recipes and the ingredients list. But if you've got the skill to know how to like swap bits out and use waste crops and sort of see how the flavours work and how some ingredients handle in the same way or will offer similar things to a recipe, then it means you're much more free to kind of come into the garden, see what's ready and at its best, harvest it, get in the kitchen, and then decide what to do with it.
And what I also like as a gardener, because I'm not a chef, I need a bit of guidance in the kitchen. And one of the things that I like in the book is that, well, I love it, is you've got this master chart of all of the different crops that we've grown and its kind of flavour profile. So if I'm missing something, I can just look and see what matches that, so I can add it into the recipe. Yeah. And suddenly it means that, I'm not actually constrained. I can't, I just find an alternative. And I find that very exciting. That's like a really nice entry step.
Yeah, and the fun thing about that chart is, so obviously over the year we grew everything and I kept track of every single crop that came out. And it doesn't just tell you how it cooks, but it also tells you what you need to do to freeze it, whether there's additional bits about that crop that's useful. And yeah, all sorts, like whether it chars, whether it roasts, what temperature it needs to roast at.
Basically every way to cook it.
Yeah, how to blanch it. And it was only after we actually finished writing the book that I realised that chart by itself makes every other cookbook you might own more useful to your garden. Yeah. So that alone is probably one of my my proudest moments with this book.
And if that isn't a reason to get the book, I don't know what is.
So, of course, there are also recipes in the book, and they follow what you're most likely to become self-sufficient in first. So it starts with salads, moves through to soups and how versatile soups are, and then it carries on from there up until like there's a bread recipe, there's a really easy pastry recipe, there's a whole section on tray bakes, both sweet and savoury.
The carrot blondie.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, that is delicious.
I made that and gave most of it to Hugh. The skin on it, it's like a really nice fudgy brownie blondie. But yeah, all sorts of ways to use, not just use, but use and celebrate every single crop and harvest, and really try and use the kitchen as a way to propel you back into the garden as fast as possible, as motivated as possible.
Yeah, because it's what you say, it's like the kitchen acts in service to the garden.
Absolutely, yeah. The soil and the garden comes first, always.
Well, as a gardener, I'd like to say it's very refreshing to see a chef have that outlook. But I think what's so nice about this is that it makes it so accessible to create such nice food at home.
Good.
Because you're letting the ingredients properly speak for themselves.
Exactly. You've done the hard bit in producing these gorgeous ingredients. The last thing you want to do is overcomplicate it when it itself is such an elegant thing. You know, if you muddy it up, it's like trying to paint with every colour at once. You know, you're just going to end up with brown.
Yeah, which is the beautiful colour of compost. So it's
never as beautiful as that shade of brown. But yeah, I think that kind of covers my contribution to this book. A nice little red chapter you can see down here. Everything goes on in the kitchen.
Yeah. And so being adaptable in the kitchen, having healthy soil, and knowing how to succession plant, these 3 videos put together are basically my beginner's masterclass to self-sufficiency. The most important thing for you to know is that you don't need a farm to be self-sufficient. And so make sure you pick up a copy of the book, because we've crammed in as much practical advice as possible in between these 2 covers to help you out.